In Chapter 11, we'll talk about the bureaucracy. We'll start with a paradox that opinion shows consistently showing that Americans want less government, but those polls also indicate that most Americans want to keep just about every specific program undertaken by government. This is a paradox that highlights the ongoing conflict between the demand for small government and the desire for benefits and services that only a large government can provide. Definition of bureaucracy is the name given to an organization that is structured hierarchically to carry out specific functions. And bureaucracies are characterized by an organization chart where the units of that organization are divided according to the specialization and expertise of the employees. Public institutions have bureaucracies, but private institutions like businesses also have their own bureaucracies, but they're structured very differently. That in the private sector, you'll see a single set of leaders. Public, many different leaders. Private organizations set up to make a profit. Public bureaucracies are set up to perform duties efficiently to save taxpayers money. Size of the bureaucracy has grown considerably. 1789, federal bureaucracy was very small with 3 departments, and the Secretary of State had only 7 clerks and a $500 budget, printing and stationery. Today, 2.8 million government employees, not including contractors or consultants. And what we'll find is a real growth in state and local government. That you can see the growth of federal employment, that's pretty steady. State is a little more, but we've seen a tremendous growth in local government. The executive branch of the federal government employs most of the government staff across a number of bodies, including cabinet agencies, independent executive agencies, independent regulatory agencies, and government corporations. And we're going to take a closer look at each of those 4 types of government corporations. Here's an organizational chart. Take some time to study how the executive branch, legislative branch, and judicial branch are figured under an organization chart. 15 cabinet departments act as the major service organizations created as needs arise. They're sanctioned by Congress and structured as line organizations directly accountable to the president. Only a handful of the people in cabinet departments must answer to the president directly. The rest are permanent employees who may be resistant to presidential directives or organizational change. Some organizations are not located within a department but still report directly to the president. When these independent executive agencies are created, they are kept separate from existing departments to avoid any potential conflicts or hostilities. An example of that was the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency. The first in a series of independent regulatory agencies was the Interstate Commerce Commission. These agencies operate outside the major executive departments. They're charged with making technical, non-political decisions in order to establish rules and regulations that protect the public interest. Examples of these: Federal Communications Commission, Nuclear Regulatory Commission. These independent regulatory agencies are really supposed to be independent of all 3 branches of government, yet they actually involve some functions of all 3. They make the rules, such as the legislative branch. They enforce the rules, such as the executive branch, and they settle disputes over the rules. That's a function seen in the judicial branch. In theory, their rulings are based on federal law and technical knowledge, not politics. Many agencies have become dominated by the very industries that they're meant to regulate, basing their decisions on business interest rather than public interest. That's a practice called agency capture. When bureaucrats allow leaders of the industry they regulate to make policy decisions, the results are less competition, fewer options, and higher prices. Modern presidents have loosened or tightened restrictions on various industries, often based on public calls for reduction or increase of governmental regulation. Presidents Carter and Reagan accomplished significant deregulation, such as airline fares and routes, but a great degree of re-regulation occurred under the George H.W. Bush administration with the Americans with Disabilities Act, Clean Air Amendments, Civil Rights Act, and Cable Re-Regulation Act. Some of the economic regulations were lifted under President Clinton, but environmental ones were tightened and then later relaxed by George W. Bush. Inadequate regulation of the financial industry was blamed by many for the banking crisis of 2008, so after much debate, Congress passed a financial industry regulation plan in 2010. Agencies acting like quasi-business enterprises by charging the public for various commercial services are called government corporations. Unlike private corporations, they do not have shareholders and do not distribute any profits as dividends or pay taxes on them. A couple of examples: U.S. Postal Service and Amtrak. When a private corporation fails and files for bankruptcy, the federal government can take control of the business. When a bank fails, the government takes over to protect customers who have deposited funds via the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, or FDIC. The federal government also can obtain partial or complete ownership of a private corporation by purchasing its preferred stock, the shares newly issued by a bank. Such takeovers were rare before 2008, though they did happen. Bureaucrats can be categorized as political appointees or civil servants. Politically connected appointments going to top bureaucrats, those are considered plum jobs, are listed in the Policy and Supporting Positions book, nicknamed the Plum Book, published by the Government Printing Office. The President decides who will fill many Plum Book positions. These political appointees are politicians, business people, and other public figures rewarded for their party allegiance or fundraising, though their experience and expertise should also be considered. The powers of political appointees appear to be formidable on paper, but maybe less so in reality. They may lack knowledge of the institutions they run and serve merely as figureheads, gaining little respect from civil servants working for them, since they often leave well before the president's term ends. And most political appointees ultimately have little influence over their subordinates. One reason is that firing a civil servant is a difficult and time-consuming process that only very rarely takes place. Let's move quickly through the history of the federal service. No career public servants existed in the early years of government. Instead, supporters of the Federalist Party acted as managers. Thomas Jefferson replaced more than 100 of them with members of his own party who ran the government for the next 25 years and became the first professional public servants. When Andrew Jackson realized that existing bureaucrats were hostile to him and resistant to his programs, he fired more officials than all previous presidents combined, emphatically supporting the spoils system. From then on, when a new president came from a party other than the predecessors, almost all federal employees were replaced. The spoils system eventually led to widespread corruption and bloated government payrolls. Civil Service Reform Act of 1883, or the Pendleton Act, established a Civil Service Commission and deemed that civil servants be selected based on a merit system, not political affiliation. In recent times, the Supreme Court has strengthened the powers of civil servants. In a number of court rulings, the court has banned threats or firings based on political affiliations, and in 1990, prevented most hiring, promoting, or transferring based on partisan support or lack of it. Civil Service Commission was abolished through the Civil Service Reform Act of 1978. The commission was abolished. Instead, what was created was the Office of Personnel Management to oversee recruiting, interviewing, testing, and hiring, as well as the Merit Systems Protection Board to hear employee grievances. The 1930s New Deal created an army of civil servants, many naturally supporting Democrats. In 1939, the Hatch Act attempted to create a more neutral work environment. It banned superiors from pressuring federal workers to make political contributions and banned those workers from taking part in political campaigns. In the 1970s, the federal court said the act violated First Amendment rights of civil servants, but the Supreme Court disagreed, pointing to the need for a nonpartisan workforce. In 1993, the Federal Employees Political Activities Act reduced many Hatch Act restrictions, allowing federal workers to participate in and donate to campaigns.